it was, to me, like making love in the time of cholera. It was at the one and the same time incredibly exciting but really dangerous because you had a major proposal for change which was poorly understood and in many quarters unwelcome. Working through a very long extended process starting at the Earth Summit all the way through to first closing in 2000, April 11th, 2000, was nearly an 8-year journey that had tremendous ups and downs. And it basically, for me, it sort of meant that I gave up any prospect of a regular career in the institution. I had a fantastic opportunity with Jim Wolfenson as president of the World Bank when he came in. And he came from the markets. He came from he was deputy head of Schroders in London, then set up his own investment bank before he came to the World Bank. And he could readily see the value of what we were proposing. And so when he came in, he said, look, I've got to make the World Bank relevant. It's no longer relevant. It's inward oriented, it's navel gazing, and it's got to change. So he ran a competition, what are your ideas? By that time I had the product that was developed after the Earth Summit, and it was killed about 4 or 5 years later. And I'd packed all the slides and overheads and put them aside because I didn't think it was going to happen. And then he put this competition out, and I won. The competition to create a carbon market, to build the first fund. But obviously, where was this going? It was going to create trade. It was going to work. And he gave me $3.25 million. Never again repeated in the history of the bank that anybody inside the bank would get that kind of pocket money to walk around for something the bank had never done before, which was raise money from the private sector. The IFC might do that, but not the World Bank.
It was like we were going to invest, or we were considering investing in a totally new thing. I mean, carbon markets didn't exist, crediting projects didn't exist. We didn't know exactly if we were going to have obligations. We didn't know anything about regulations. So it was like a jump into the unknown. Then the World Bank came with this proposal, and it was a sort of a double reasons why we managed to get a decision, which to me even now, today, looks a bit amazing that we made that decision so early. In the end, we did invest $5 million, so that was a big sum. At the time, for a totally new thing, nobody had an idea on how it was going to work. Because most of the energy companies in Europe didn't invest in the Prototype Carbon Fund. So we had the early mover advantage.
The great majority of the people who were not big corporates, who were trying to make markets as startups, were very pleased with the role the bank played. We gave them life, we gave them trade, so I went out of my way to build the private market and to support those who were in the market.
We had very little capital, and it was very hard for large industries to take us very seriously. And we had to convince them that our intellectual property and our staff was more than sufficient to make up for the capital, and in fact they should give us the money, which ultimately they did. So we ended up raising about 1.2 billion US at our height.
We made it work in the Prototype Carbon Fund because the Prototype Carbon Fund gave rise to many other baby funds, and they laid down all the rules, writing, contracts, documents, reference documents that were going to be used afterwards in the carbon trading and on carbon markets. Giving a price on carbon also proved to be working, and a crediting project proved to be something that developed hugely throughout the world.
We had been spending years at that point in CDM countries, working to get to know government officials and projects and a network, so that we actually had connections, and we had built up on the analytical side a framework of models, so that we had some rigor rather than saying let's just go buy some carbon off a CDM project. We had models to anticipate what a portfolio should look like, how many tons of carbon you would actually get off of a project. It wasn't the headline number that they said they would produce. It was, well, what do you really think they would do? So we walked in with an intellectual framework that they understood and respected, and realized it would be very hard to recreate themselves.
Spain got involved in carbon markets when we realized that we wanted to comply with our international targets, but our emissions were so high that the only way to comply was to make full use of carbon markets as part of our compliance strategy. So we thought that this compliance strategy should include, in a transparent manner, the need to purchase offsets and the need to ensure that these offsets came from projects that had a positive impact in those societies that were going to benefit from this carbon markets funding.
It was both an opportunity but also incredibly difficult being, as some people call it, an entrepreneur on the inside of a big institution.
It was not just with the World Bank that we developed carbon funds. We also work with the European Investment Bank. We also developed some bilateral initiatives with some other countries, trying to explore to what extent these green investment schemes could deliver something. And we tried also to deliver some concrete solutions through other small development banks, such as the CAF, the Corporación Andina de Fomento.
The biggest mistake I feel I made was encouraging China to provide liquidity for their industrial gases from their 8 big chemical plants. You know, I like to think that I was well motivated at the time. My idea was, if I can't bring in this volume and make sure that it's there, then there won't be enough liquidity in the European market. The prices will go up so high that the Europeans will walk away from a market because it'll be just too expensive. The problem was that the Chinese, and the Chinese didn't want to do it. The Chinese only wanted to create emissions reductions out of renewables. And they had even a focus, an admirable focus on Western China as a sort of development play. But I talked them around, and then of course they completely dominated the market. They brought on stream all of the industrial gas plants, more than anybody thought they could, because the private sector got involved and was very creative on how to do it, including myself in Climate Change Capital with my friends after I left the bank, only to find that that was a massive oversupply, because, you know, I didn't conceive of how much that would contribute to, you know, the margin of oversupply. And of course I didn't conceive of the financial crisis either, but I really regret that move.
Fun fact, all environmental markets collapse. The why, we have long arguments over dinner and drinks and things, but there has yet to be a market that hasn't collapsed.
I'm very excited about climate finance, devoting large amounts of capital to projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but more of us as an investment vehicle rather than just carbon finance.
We created, in effect, the first results-based financing around environmental attributes.
Green bonds is another way. It's just using traditional debt instruments from bond markets for green projects. That could be a good way. And eventually some market mechanisms, but I couldn't tell if regulated by the private sector or the public sector, or even by the UN with new blood and a new attitude.
We're not starting from scratch, you know. We have a whole infrastructure of third-party verifiers that are accredited, and you can bolt on particular competencies. You have the concept of a registry function for transparency in creating and retiring. The contractual framework is, you know, eminently adaptable to other products. I think that was the lasting contribution, even if the offsetting, you know, component, you know, dies a slow death or is minimalized.